Hi, my name is Ryan. Today I'm turning the crow into metal using that pewter I melted. But first I need to make a silicone mold for this. So I have some cardboard and parchment paper. The reason I'm using parchment paper is I think that the silicone won't stick to it, which will make it way easier to get it out of the cardboard cleanly. This doesn't need to be terribly accurate. I just need some place to contain the silicone for the mold. Now to put this crow on here, I don't want it moving, and I don't want any of the silicone getting behind it, so I'm going to glue it down with hot glue. I'm not normally a fan of hot glue, but that's mostly because it gets used wrong. People use it for everything, when really it should be used for like temporary applications like this or small crafting purposes. Okay, I think I'm actually going to shrink this box a bit, because I don't need quite that much, so yeah, like that. So I have here Mold Max 60, which is a silicone rubber compound for making high temperature molds. Now high temperature is relative. You can't typically use silicone for metal casting, but for pewter you can, because pewter is pretty low temperature melting. Now it says here you're supposed to measure this by weight with a gram scale, which I don't have, and that vacuum degassing is recommended, and I don't really have a way to do that. So we're just going to send it and see what happens. If it fails, it fails. Thoroughly. I'm use this to stir it because I hate it and I'm going to throw it away. Now, it's supposed to have a 3-to-1 ratio by weight. I assume that this is 3-to-1. Maybe a dumb assumption. But so I'm going to use half of this and half of this. Should get me close. Now, unlike resin, this doesn't harden quickly. I have about 40 minutes to work with it. So I can take my time and mix it up real good. The color is pretty uniform, so I'm going to call that good. Now before I mix them, I want to use some kind of mold release. I don't have proper silicone mold release, but I have silicone lubricant, which according to some forum posts is pretty similar. So I'm going to try it. And now we're just going to go full send and pour this right in. Okay, well now this needs to sit for 24 hours to cure, so we'll come back to this later. Okay, so it's been about 24 hours. This is nice and hard. As you can see, it didn't settle to a flat surface. The pot time was advertised as 40 minutes, which is how long I have to actually work with it. And I definitely didn't wait 40 minutes to pour it, so I think that pot time is a little bit off. Granted, it was an old kit of silicone, so I may have waited a bit long to make it. Let's see how well this turned out. Oh, that worked like a charm. It came off real nice. So you can get the crow back out without breaking it. Oh, there we go. We got a lovely mold out of that. Need a little bit of cleanup, but that should work nicely. I'm not too worried about these edges here, because in the final casting, I can always trim that off. I'm more worried about like just the general shape. Need a little bit of cleanup here. But yeah, that looks nice. There we go, nice and clean. Right there. The sanding marks that are still in there. I'm surprised at that. Okay, so I preheated this mold in the oven. I've pre-melted the pewter and try to get as much of the imperfections out as possible. Now I'm just going to heat up both of them some more with the blowtorch and pour it in. The nice thing about using a silicone mold and using pewter is I can redo this as many times as I need. And normally with metal casting you can't do this and just keep melting things into spots until you have a full cast. You have to just try over and over again. Which is one nice thing about pewter. They can just melt it while it's in the mold. Okay, now let's let this cool off and see what we get. Okay, so it's had some time to cool off. It's still warm, but cool enough to handle with the bare hands, so let's see how well this turned out. Okay, not as good as I'd hoped. It's got a lot of park marks in it, which might be from this off-gassing, I'm hoping. So I'm going to melt this down and try again. So this didn't come out significantly better. This is my third attempt, and I think I'm overheating the mold because there's been a divot here that's been getting worse and worse every time. When I look at the equivalent area on the mold, it's quite gummy, and now it's dented in. So I think there's an air bubble or a water bubble or something trapped in there. And generally in the middle of this is getting kind of concave, which on the original it's convex. So a lot of this I can fix with sanding. So I'm not going to try to recast it again. But I need to get rid of that divot. I can regrind out these areas here, but this divot is a bit much. So I'm going to try to use a small butane torch and maybe a soldering iron to try to fill in that little area there. Okay, the butane torch isn't working. Let's try again with the propane torch. Okay, I stopped because this edge is starting to melt and I don't want that. It does look like I filled in that hole successfully. So now I just need to sand it a lot, but first I need to let this cool down. I started by filing down both the front and the back to make it smooth again and to thin it out. I tried hand filing it because I was trying to save as much of the shavings as I could so that I could remelt them. But then I got impatient with this and started using a belt sander. This also took forever, so I decided to go all out and just hit it with an angle grinder. And now here's where we are now. I'm at a thickness that I think is appropriate, and I'm starting to smooth out the surface. And I'm going to switch from using the angle grinder, which is now too aggressive, and go back to hand sanding and filing. But first, I need something on the back to grip it. So I'm going to attempt to heat up a couple screws and just push them into the back so they can melt into the pewter a little bit. I'm doing this now before I continue any further, because if I mar the front at all, I don't want it to be perfect already when I do that, so I don't have to fix it again. Okay, since that didn't work, now I'm going to hand sand this smooth, get some of the contours back, carve back in those details with the Dremel and hand files. So now I'm moving my way up the grits of sandpaper to get this smooth. I was sanding at 60, so now I'm sanding at 100. Seeing some marks in here from the vise, so I'm going to just sand those out quickly and then go back to the 100. Now 200 grit. Now 400 grit, which is kind of a big step, but I don't have any 320 grit, so 400 it is. Now I'm going to wet sand with the 400 grit. Because normally I'd step from 400 to 600, but I don't have any 600, so I'm going to go straight from 4 to 8. Now we're doing 1000 grit. Sanding is horrible and I hate it. On to 2000. And now we're on to 3000 grit. I'm trying to be careful not to set the sandpaper down anywhere, because it's so fine, anything I pick up off the table is going to scratch this way more than the sandpaper. And undo all this work. As a final step, I'm going to polish this. I don't have any proper cutting compound, but I do have this headlight polish, which is basically a cutting compound. It's made for plastic, but I think it should work for this. Brand new, clean microfiber towel. Yes, this would be faster with an electric polisher, but I don't have one this small. And here we are. Now the camera kept cutting out while I was doing that. In case I'm missing the footage, my progression was 60 grit to 100 grit to 200 grit to 400 grit to 800 to 1000, 2000, 3000, and then polish with a cutting compound. Now the reason why I used those specific grits is because that's the paper I had. If I had 600, I would have used 600. If I had higher grits like 4000, 5000, I would have used those too. But I didn't, so here we are. So here's the final result. I think it's pretty good. It's not quite a mirror shine, it's pretty close, but it's still got kind of that brushed aluminum look. If I had the higher grits of sandpaper, I might have been able to get a mirror shine out of it. But pewter is also very soft, so it scratches super easily, so I don't know if I'd ever be able to get a true mirror shine out of it. But you can get pretty close, as you can see here. And pewter is quite easy to sand and polish. This is only a couple hours of the work, whereas doing this with a piece of steel would have taken much longer. Compared to my first sculpture, it's a pretty close rendition, not quite. Some of the details didn't quite translate, but that's okay. Overall, I'm pretty pleased. It's got a curve to it, which was intentional. Overall, I'm pretty pleased. I could see myself doing something like this again in the future.